The more we know about what's in our food, the more we know how it's produced, the more careful and angrier we're going to be. But in order for us to have knowledge, we need to have transparency. And that's why I thought that the Prop 37 vote to label foods with GMOs was so important. Not because genetically engineered foods are so evil. I do think they've done more harm than good up until now, especially from an environmental perspective. But they may yet to be proven to be more evil or less likely world-saving hunger beaters. But it's not all that important that we know whether there are GMOs in our cornflakes. Or that is, it could be important, but it's not more important than knowing about pesticides in our food or antibiotics in our food, or food that's raised using torture, or food that's processed by mistreating humans or damaging the environment. In survey after survey, people have said by a huge majority, 90% in some surveys, that they want to know whether their food contains GMOs. And my guess is that when they're labeled, because they will be, this was a setback, but this is a fight that's going to be won, despite the money and the lives of the people fighting against transparency, when they are labeled, people will stop buying them. And when people stop buying them, farmers will stop planting seeds with them. And thus the market will have done its work, but the market's not going to be able to do its work without information. For example, if I tell you how many antibiotics were used in the raising of a chicken and what % of those antibiotics leached into our water supply and what % resided in the chicken meat you were eating and how likely those residual antibiotics were to raise the likelihood of new antibiotic-resistant disease-causing bacteria, and of formerly effective antibiotics failing to work on you or your parents or your children as a result of that, well, my guess is you'd be less likely to buy that chicken. And since 80% of the antibiotics, this is kind of funny actually, I'll finish the sentence and tell you what, or phrase at least. And since 80% of the antibiotics administered in the United States are given to animals, first time I gave a talk like this was in late 2007, so just about 5 years ago. And I said 50% of antibiotics were given to animals. And I got home and someone emailed me and said, well, actually, it's now 60%. Okay, fine. So I changed the number to 60%. And then a couple of years later, someone said to me, actually, it's 70%. Okay, I checked it out. It's now 70%. Well, it's now 80%. So soon it'll be 95%. But since 80% of antibiotics administered in the United States are given to animals to help them grow faster and keep them from getting sick, which is necessary because you put them in these terrible conditions, and you'd be against these conditions even if it weren't for all this antibiotic use because they're just so terrible. That's a lot of reasons for producers to be against transparency. If you bought less chicken because you were afraid of antibiotic resistance, well, that's one. And if you bought less chicken because you didn't like the thought of chickens collapsing under their own weight because their underdeveloped legs couldn't support their enormous breasts, well, that's two. And from the producer's perspective, better you're kept in the dark.